canon of Western music is studded with artistic statements that, for reasons noble or ignoble, miss the mark so much that aesthetically they end up sounding like the opposite of music. While fans from all corners of the music community argue and seek consensus over the best albums ever made, there seems to be very little serious, earnest or structured debate as to what the worst is. We're not here to contribute to that serious, structured or earnest debate today. Anyone can make a bad album, you could argue. Lazy songwriting, contextually inappropriate arrangements. Disco worked for the Bee Gees, it did not work for you, Johnny Mathis. The debilitating effects of lifestyle and the erosion of mojo all go to artists making albums that range from disappointing to truly god-awful. Don't underestimate the impact of pretentiousness in that as well. But I also think the measure of how bad an album is to be the distance between it and the best work that an artist can do. So something like the Beach Boys doing Summer Days and Summer Nights and Summer in Paradise, or Van Morrison doing Moondance and then Wavelength. It's very hard to say an album is a bad album when you don't have a critical baseline on an artist. For example, I find Norwegian death metal music to be pretty much universally awful, and this is me being a proud but distant son of Norway. But I couldn't tell you what a good Norwegian death metal album is or a bad one. However, for me, it's not necessary to have a process to assess the worst album of all time. There's no objective measure of folly and foible that can go into it for me. The worst album of all time exists simply axiomatically, and I can really not brook any debate on it. So I propose to at least advance the settlement of that debate once and for all by offering for your delectation and consideration what I squarely believe to be the worst album ever made by perhaps some considerable distance. It's not so much that it's painful or distasteful to listen to, it is both of those in spades, but also that it's a bewildering and insulting joke, and sadly, a salutary lesson in how far from the grace of God any of us can fall at any time. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Having Fun with Elvis on Stage. Right away, we're aware something hokey is going on. The mangled syntax of the title is unpleasant. Having Fun on Stage with Elvis flows far better. The panel of cover portraits show a decidedly chubby Elvis. Also, the insert box in the top right hand corner, a talking album only, raises the curiosity and dread simultaneously. It is indeed a talking album, although most times a slurring, mumbling, rambling stream of consciousness expressed as talking would be a more accurate description. But down home as some of the touches may be, there's one scheming, conniving figure behind this, the horrid little goblin who managed Presley's career, Colonel Tom Parker. In 1972, in an attempt to pay off gambling debts at the International Hotel, Parker had sold to RCA President Rocco Laginestra the rights to all of Elvis's future royalties, both on his new work and on his pre-1973 back catalogue, for $5.4 million. Parker then took his customary 50-50 split but neglected to protect Elvis from the tax ramifications, which left Elvis with between $750,000 and $1 million for his entire life's work. He also locked Elvis into a long-term deal at the International, 4 weeks a year for 5 years for the same money as he was getting in 1972, plus a nugatory annual rise. All those great records at Sun, all his pre-army hits, his late 60s comeback and any work he had ahead of him, and more importantly, the money his estate would earn from record sales after he died. He would never earn another dollar on royalties, or for the future work if he did, he would be paid a pittance. By the end of his life, Elvis, who had taken to extravagant and manic spending after Priscilla left and got slogged hard when Priscilla renegotiated her divorce settlement, was forced to mortgage Gracelands for $100,000 just to keep his show on the road. What of course this meant was, with no money coming in from movies and no income from recording, why Elvis bothered to keep making records, one has to wonder. The Colonel's only way to milk his increasingly depressed and drug-addled milk cow was through TV and personal appearances. Despite the triumph of his live satellite broadcast from 1973, TV was not a good medium for the rapidly physically deteriorating Presley, and the Colonel was locked into that long-running deal with the International Hotel. Elvis played 636 shows there in 7 years. Overseas tours were out because the Colonel, as an illegal alien, didn't have a US passport. So Elvis had to work at the International up to 120 gigs a year. He played usually 2 shows a night, and then work an ever-decreasing circuit of progressively smaller markets just to make the payroll until he died. Any paraphernalia or marketing which was generated by these tours and personal appearances went to a company owned by the Colonel, from which Elvis drew 22% of the profits. Colonel drew 56%, and his business partners drew the other 22%. That said, by 1974 the Colonel was short on money again. A degenerate gambler who used most of his 30 pieces of silver to pay off that $2 million debt, he was busted again and needed quick cash. The notion came to him of releasing an Elvis record on his own private label and hawking it at concerts. Given that RCA owned the rights to all of Elvis's musical recordings, the Colonel hit on the idea of collecting tapes from before the deal was signed and compiling the between-song banter into a souvenir of Elvis in concert, his combined wit and wisdom, having fun with Elvis on stage. What we got was 37 minutes of incoherent, drugged up, rambling attempts by Elvis to catch his breath, and detailed documentation of the ritual by which he would pick some middle-aged housewife who'd come all the way from Decatur, Illinois, and hand her one of his silk scarves or the flashy but worthless crackerjack box rhinestone rings he wore. The tapes run from 1969 to 1972, but the segments aren't presented in any order or with any reference to one another, and the way the music is edited out of them is sure to make you laugh at least once. There is one worthwhile stretch, about 8 minutes in, where Elvis monologues between gasps of breath and sips of water for 3.5 minutes on a sanitised version of his early days in the industry. The record then quickly descends into horror again, with seemingly interminable stretches of Presley singing the phrase, "well," the way a karaoke Elvis impersonator might. There's also a recurring piano figure followed by Presley complaining about how his belt doesn't fit him. Again and again. It is a horror that doesn't lift until it finally just ends, and you're left staring dumbly at the ashes of what many would have you believe was one of the load-bearing beams of rock and roll, and realise that all, in the end, kept it up was avarice and moral turpitude. Initially, Parker sold the record at gigs, as per his plan, and profited 100% of the profits. RCA, however, threatened to sue, and Parker duly handed it over to them. Presley was furious about the whole business and demanded RCA withdraw the album, but as soon as Elvis left the building, as it were, RCA reissued it, and unbelievably it made number 130 on the rock charts and number 9 on the country charts. And these were in the days before there was such a thing as hipster irony. This is a record that, beyond being a snatch and grab it for $5 or whatever at the merch table in the lobby, achieves absolutely nothing beyond wasting the time of the listener, infuriating them, and if they care about such things, bewildering them as to the purpose of what they just heard. None of it is good. In fact, it is deeply and inappropriately subversive. All of it is bad because it makes a man whom we should be reassessing as a major figure in the Western musical canon look like a buffoon, and the only people who emerged from the entire affair with any reward were the hucksters and thieves who descended on a psychically wounded man to pick clean his carcass. Thus, I offer for your consideration my nomination for the worst album ever, Having Fun with Elvis on Stage. But I don't like the